The interstellar summit of Zorvan Prime was the galaxy's crown jewel of diplomacy, drawing representatives from every known species. Delegates filled the colossal Grand Atrium, a space so vast that entire starships could dock within. Holographic banners shimmered with multilingual welcomes, and the air buzzed with the hum of unfamiliar languages. Commander Drenak of the Xanthar Legion towered above most beings in the crowd. His emerald-scaled frame exuded power, his molten gold eyes sharp and calculating. Draped in ceremonial armor that glinted under the atrium's artificial suns, he stood at the helm of his entourage, radiating authority. To him, the summit was an elaborate charade. True strength, he believed, was forged in battle, not in meaningless chatter. As Drenak surveyed the assembly, his gaze landed on a strange pair entering the hall. A human, one of the smaller, frailer species, strolled casually amidst the towering delegates. By his side trotted an odd creature, golden-furred and decidedly unremarkable compared to the grandeur of the galaxy's fauna. The animal's tail wagged as its tongue lolled happily from its mouth. "What is that?" Drenak rumbled, his deep voice cutting through the noise. His aides fell silent. The human, Lieutenant Martin Kane, caught the question and turned, a grin spreading across his face. "This," he said, kneeling to pat the creature's head, "is Daisy. She's my service dog." Drenak's golden eyes gleamed with disdainful amusement. "Service? That looks like a domesticated pet. Do you intend to serve refreshments or perform tricks?" Martin's grin didn't falter. "Daisy's a professional. Her job is to help me manage PTSD. She makes sure I don't freeze up or get overwhelmed. Assuming she has any remaining semblance of personality, that is." Martin stood in the dirt with his arms folded and his feet planted firmly apart. Drenak snorted, the sound resonating like distant thunder. "You rely on this creature for survival? How utterly pathetic. A warrior's strength comes from within, not from the crutch of a lesser life form." Martin's expression remained calm, though his hand rested protectively on Daisy's head. "She's saved my life more times than I can count. But don't worry, you'll see for yourself soon enough." "After tomorrow," Les said slowly, "nothing will become any different for us than this." Drenak's laughter echoed through the hall as he turned away. "A weakling and his pet. The galaxy will not bow to such absurdity." The next day, the summit began in earnest. Delegates debated trade routes, territorial disputes, and military alliances within the circular chamber, where the acoustics amplified every voice. Martin, seated in a less conspicuous section, observed quietly, his role as a junior representative requiring more listening than speaking. At his feet, Daisy lay calmly, her ears occasionally twitching at the rise and fall of heated arguments. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. Delegates from other species whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued by the unassuming animal. A feathery alien with vibrant plumage named Corval leaned over to Martin. "Fascinating," Corval said, his beak clicking softly. "That creature appears utterly loyal. Is it intelligent?" Martin chuckled. "She's smarter than most people give her credit for." On the other side of the chamber, Drenak watched the exchange with a mixture of irritation and contempt. "That human," he muttered to an aide, "insults this assembly by parading his pet. It is a mockery of our purpose here." As if sensing Drenak's gaze, Martin glanced over and offered a friendly wave. Drenak scoffed, turning his attention back to the ongoing discussions. The summit took a grim turn on the third day. Midway through a session on interstellar resource sharing, alarms blared throughout the complex. The lights dimmed, and a synthetic voice echoed across the chamber. "Security breach detected. All delegates, proceed to designated safe zones immediately." Panic rippled through the crowd as guards ushered delegates toward fortified exits. Drenak, ever the warrior, ignored the protocol. Drawing a curved blade from his side, he barked orders to his aides. "Secure the perimeter. We will face this threat head on." Martin grabbed Daisy's leash, his calm demeanor unshaken. But as the crowd surged, Daisy tensed, her nose twitching. She barked sharply and pulled against the leash, leading Martin away from the evacuation route. "What is it, girl?" Martin asked, crouching to meet her eyes. Daisy barked again, more urgently this time, and tugged harder. "Your creature is a nuisance," Drenak growled, striding toward them. "We must move to safety." Martin didn't budge. "She's trying to tell me something, and you're listening to it." Drenak's tone dripped with incredulity. "Always," Martin replied simply. Trusting Daisy, he followed her lead, veering down a side corridor. The dog's sharp barks cut through the noise, guiding them away from the main evacuation route. Moments later, a deafening explosion shook the complex. The corridor they had just abandoned was engulfed in flames, the shockwave rattling the walls. Drenak's golden eyes widened in disbelief as he turned to see the destruction. "The main route," Martin said grimly. "It was a trap." Daisy whined softly and nudged Martin's leg, urging him forward. He scratched behind her ears. "Good girl, lead the way." Despite himself, Drenak followed, his massive frame looming behind the human and his dog. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Could this simple creature truly possess such foresight? As they navigated the maze-like corridors, Daisy's instincts proved invaluable. She paused at intersections, sniffing the air before choosing the safest path. Each turn took them farther from the chaos, though the distant sounds of combat grew louder. Finally, Daisy stopped in front of a ventilation grate, barking sharply. Martin knelt to inspect it, catching a faint whiff of acrid fumes. "Gas leak," he said. "We need to get out of here fast." Drenak's scaly brow furrowed. "This is madness. You place your faith in an animal?" Martin glanced up at him. She hasn't been wrong yet. Reluctantly, Drenak helped pry open the grate. Beyond it lay a narrow maintenance tunnel, its dimly lit expanse stretching into uncertainty. No signs of any living things disturbed the nightly quiet now, and Drenak went after Jen. "Guess you owe her one, Commander," Martin said as they climbed inside. Drenak scowled but said nothing. For the first time, he wondered if the human's trust in his pet might not be as foolish as it seemed. The maintenance tunnel stretched ahead, dimly lit by the occasional flicker of emergency lights. Daisy trotted confidently, her nose close to the ground and her ears swiveling at every sound. Martin followed close behind, his hand brushing the wall for balance. Drenak crouched awkwardly in the narrow space, grumbled as his broad shoulders scraped against the metal walls. "She cannot possibly know where she's going," Drenak said, his voice low but edged with irritation. "This is blind fumbling." Martin glanced back with a smirk. "You said that before the last explosion, remember?" Drenak's growl echoed faintly down the corridor. One instance of fortune does not equate to reliability. Daisy suddenly stopped, her body tensing as her tail stiffened. A low growl rumbled from her throat, sending a shiver through the cramped space. Martin immediately knelt beside her. "What is it, girl?" he whispered. Drenak reached for the hilt of his blade, his warrior instincts sharpening. "Trouble," he muttered, scanning the dim passage for any sign of danger. The sound came first, a faint scuttling, like claws against metal. It grew louder, accompanied by the unmistakable hum of energy weapons. Daisy barked sharply and turned toward a side passage, her tail wagging in short, urgent movements. "She's found another way," Martin said, already moving to follow her. Drenak hesitated. "You would trust a beast over your own senses." Martin didn't stop. "She hasn't been wrong yet. Stay here if you want." Drenak snarled in frustration, but followed, his pride warring with the nagging suspicion that the dog might indeed know something he didn't. They ducked into the side passage just as the scuttling grew louder. Moments later, a group of mercenaries appeared in the main tunnel, their armor reflecting the dim light. The mercenaries stopped, their movements precise as they scanned the area with glowing visors. One of them, taller than the rest, raised a hand to signal silence. Their weapons hummed ominously, but the group eventually moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance. In the side passage, Martin let out a quiet breath of relief. "Good call, Daisy," he said, scratching behind her ears. In the dining room, there was a slight light on. Drenak stared at the dog, his golden eyes narrowing. I cannot fathom how she detected them so quickly. Her senses are sharper than I anticipated. Martin smiled faintly. She's a Labrador. That nose is her superpower. Drenak tilted his head. A superpower? Your species truly romanticizes weakness. Martin laughed softly, the sound echoing through the narrow space. You'll come around, Commander. You're just not used to teamwork. They pressed on, Daisy leading them through a maze of tunnels. Each step brought them closer to the surface, but also closer to danger. The air grew warmer, tinged with the acrid scent of burning metal, and the faint sounds of combat echoed through the walls. After what felt like hours, Daisy stopped again. She sniffed the air, her tail wagging tentatively, before moving to a small access panel on the wall. She pawed at it, barking softly. Martin examined the panel. Looks like a maintenance hatch. Good girl. Drenak watched with a skeptical eye as Martin pried the hatch open, revealing a ladder leading upward. You humans place too much faith in your tools and your pets. Martin grinned as he climbed onto the ladder. And yet, here we are, alive and making progress. Drenak grumbled something unintelligible and followed, his claws clanging softly against the rungs. Daisy waited until both men were clear, before scrambling up the ladder with surprising agility. The hatch opened into a small storage room filled with discarded equipment and supplies. A single door stood on the far side, its locking mechanism blinking red. Martin approached it cautiously, Daisy close at his heels. Any idea what's on the other side? Martin asked. Drenak stepped forward, his golden eyes narrowing. I hear movement, hostiles, perhaps. Drenak said. Martin nodded, pulling a compact plasma pistol from his belt. Daisy, stay close. We'll handle this. But Daisy had other ideas. She sniffed the air, her ears twitching, and let out a sharp bark before darting toward a vent in the corner of the room. She pawed at it insistently. She finally succeeded in poking a hole with one of her longer spines, and scurried through. She's found another route, Martin said, crouching to examine the vent. Looks like it connects to the same space beyond the door. Drenak's claws flexed against the hilt of his blade. You're suggesting we follow her into that crawl space? Nada shrugged. Martin shrugged. I'm suggesting we don't walk into an ambush. Before Drenak could object, Daisy slipped into the vent, her wagging tail disappearing into the darkness. Martin followed, moving quickly but carefully, and Drenak, after a moment's hesitation, squeezed himself into the cramped space. The vent led to an observation point overlooking a large chamber. Below, a group of mercenaries stood clustered around a console, their weapons slung casually as they argued in a guttural language. Crates of supplies were stacked high along the walls, and a faint hum indicated the presence of a power generator. Drenak's eyes gleamed with predatory interest. A forward operating post. If we take it out, their communications will be crippled. Martin nodded. We'll need a distraction. Daisy barked softly, as if volunteering. Drenak blinked. Surely you don't mean to send her into the fray. Martin smiled. Watch and learn. He unclipped Daisy's leash and whispered a few commands. The dog wagged her tail once, then crept out of the vent with remarkable stealth. She circled the chamber, sniffing the crates, until she found what she was looking for. A stack of volatile-looking canisters, marked with universal hazard symbols. "Good girl," Martin murmured as Daisy grabbed a small, loose cable in her teeth and tugged. Sparks flew, and the canisters began to hiss ominously. The mercenaries froze, their heads snapping toward the noise. One of them shouted a warning, but it was too late. The first canister exploded, setting off a chain reaction that sent the entire chamber into chaos. As smoke filled the air, Martin and Drenak leapt into action. The human fired precise shots, taking down the disoriented mercenaries, while Drenak charged with his blade, cutting through their ranks with brutal efficiency. Amid the chaos, Daisy returned to Martin's side, her tail wagging furiously. He knelt to pat her head. "You're the best, Daisy." Drenak stood over the last fallen mercenary, his blade dripping with greenish ichor. He turned to the dog, his expression unreadable. "That was impressive." Martin grinned. "Told you she's a professional." Drenak's golden eyes lingered on Daisy for a moment before he nodded. "Perhaps there is more to her than I thought." The trio moved on, the sounds of battle fading behind them as they pressed deeper into the complex. For the first time, Drenak found himself wondering if this peculiar partnership between human and animal might hold a strength even he couldn't fully comprehend. The path forward led through a wide, half-collapsed corridor littered with debris. Flames flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that danced in eerie patterns. Daisy led the way, her movements precise and deliberate as she avoided loose metal and unstable rubble. Martin followed, his pistol drawn, while Drenak stalked behind them, his blade still slick with greenish ichor. "You have an uncanny faith in this animal," Drenak said, his voice low, but edged with curiosity. Martin glanced back. "Faith is earned. Daisy's proven herself time and again. The arrival of Max Grayson and MP Paramore scientists in modern times had proven the world she'd do it." Drenak's golden eyes narrowed. "Among my kind, trust is reserved for those who stand equal in strength and skill. Yet you trust a creature that would fall in a single blow." Martin slowed his pace, keeping his tone even. "It's not about size or strength. It's about heart, and knowing someone, or something, has your back no matter what." Before Drenak could respond, Daisy stopped abruptly. Her body tensed, and she let out a low growl. Martin crouched beside her, scanning the area. "What is it, girl?" Daisy barked softly and tilted her head toward a side passage, sniffing the air intently. "She senses something," Martin whispered, motioning for Drenak to stay alert. They crept toward the passage, the sound of distant voices growing louder. Peering around the corner, Martin saw a group of mercenaries clustered around a console, reviewing holographic maps of the summit complex. "They're coordinating," Martin murmured. "If we can disable that terminal, we'll cut off their communications." Drenak's lips curled into a predatory grin. "We attack." "Wait," Martin said, placing a hand on the Xanthar warrior's arm. "If we rush in, they'll call for reinforcements. We need a distraction." Daisy wagged her tail once, as if volunteering. She moved forward before Martin could say a word, slinking into the shadows like a predator. Drenak watched her go with a mix of skepticism and admiration. "You're sending her into danger?" Martin gave a faint smile. "She knows what she's doing." Daisy circled the room, avoiding the mercenaries' notice with ease. She stopped near a pile of equipment, her nose twitching as she sniffed out a small, glowing device. With a calculated tug, she dislodged a power coupling. Sparks flew, and the hum of the terminal faltered. "What's going on?" one of the mercenaries shouted, spinning around. Daisy darted away, grabbing another cable in her teeth and pulling. The room erupted into chaos as equipment short-circuited and the lights flickered wildly. Taking advantage of the confusion, Martin and Drenak burst into the room. Martin's shots were precise, taking out two mercenaries before they could react. Drenak moved like a storm, his blade cutting through the remaining enemies with brutal efficiency. Within moments, the room was silent, except for the crackling of damaged electronics. Daisy reappeared, her tail wagging as she dropped the dislodged power coupling at Martin's feet. He crouched to scratch behind her ears. "Good girl. You just made our job a whole lot easier." Drenak sheathed his blade, his golden eyes fixed on Daisy. "She is unconventional, yet effective. I did not expect to witness such ingenuity from a beast." "She's more than a beast," Martin said, his tone light but firm. "She's my partner." Drenak gave a slow nod, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps I judged too quickly." The trio pressed on, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with Daisy leading the way. The distant sounds of combat grew louder, punctuated by explosions that sent tremors through the walls. As they approached a large open atrium, Daisy froze again. Her ears perked, and her tail dropped low. She let out a single, sharp bark before moving toward a shadowed alcove. Martin followed her, crouching low as he peered into the atrium. Several heavily armed mercenaries patrolled the space, their movements precise and disciplined. In the center of the room stood a towering figure clad in advanced armor, its glowing visor scanning the surroundings. "Command unit," Martin whispered. "If we take them out, the rest will scatter." Drenak's claws flexed eagerly. "Then we strike, now." Martin shook his head. "Not yet. There's too much open ground. We'd get pinned down before we reach them." Daisy whined softly, nudging Martin's hand. He looked down to see her wagging her tail, her eyes bright with determination. The thorny orbs arrived safely. "You have an idea, girl?" Martin murmured. Daisy barked once, then padded toward a ventilation shaft that overlooked the atrium. She laid down and lay watching as the main ventilation dock turned on. Drenak frowned. "You cannot possibly think she can take down a command unit." "She doesn't have to," Martin said. "She just needs to create an opening." Daisy slipped into the vent, moving with practiced ease. Martin and Drenak watched from their cover as the Labrador emerged above the atrium, her movements silent and deliberate. She dropped onto a stack of crates, her presence still unnoticed by the patrolling mercenaries. The moment came quickly. Daisy knocked over a small crate, sending its contents spilling across the floor. The noise drew the attention of the guards, who moved toward the disturbance with weapons raised. "Now," Martin whispered. He and Drenak moved as one. Martin fired a series of precise shots, taking out 2 guards before they could react. Drenak charged forward, his blade a blur of deadly motion as he engaged the command unit in a ferocious melee. The fight was swift but brutal. The command unit's armor deflected Drenak's initial strikes, but the Xanthar warrior's relentless assault eventually found its mark. With a roar, he drove his blade into a vulnerable joint, bringing the armored figure to its knees. As the remaining mercenaries scattered, Daisy bounded back to Martin's side, her tail wagging triumphantly. He knelt to meet her, rubbing her ears affectionately. "That's my girl. You were amazing." Drenak stood over the fallen command unit, his golden eyes blazing. He looked at Daisy, then at Martin, and finally nodded. "She is no mere companion. She is a warrior." Martin grinned. "Told you she's got heart." Daisy barked, her tail wagging furiously as the 3 of them prepared to move forward, an unlikely alliance forged in the fires of combat. The corridors leading to the surface were alive with the sounds of chaos, explosions, distant shouts, and the faint hum of engines powering up for evacuation. The summit's remaining security forces were making a last-ditch effort to repel the attackers, but the odds were clearly against them. Martin, Daisy, and Drenak moved swiftly, their bond forged through the relentless trials behind them. As they approached the final stretch of the complex, Daisy suddenly stopped and sniffed the air, her body tensing. Her growl was low but insistent. "Another trap?" Martin asked, kneeling beside her. Drenak tilted his head, his golden eyes narrowing. I hear nothing unusual, but her senses have proven sharper than my own. He gripped the hilt of his blade. We should trust her judgment. Martin gave Daisy a reassuring pat. What do you smell, girl? She barked once, then tugged on her leash, leading them to a side alcove, where she pawed at a recessed panel. Martin inspected it, finding a small access hatch. Looks like an emergency maintenance route. If she's right, this should take us around whatever ambush they've set. Drenak's lip curled in grudging admiration. This dog of yours defies reason. They slipped into the narrow maintenance tunnel, the sounds of combat fading as they moved through the hidden pathway. The air was stale and heavy, but the route was clear. Daisy led them unerringly, her nose twitching with purpose. Finally, they emerged into an open area just beyond the main evacuation point. The scene was a battlefield. Mercenaries surrounded the remaining delegates and security personnel, their weapons trained on the group. A large transport ship hovered above, its engines kicking up dust and debris as it prepared for a final assault. They're going to wipe out everyone who's left, Martin said, his voice tight. Drenak's claws flexed against his blade hilt. Not while we stand. We must disrupt their assault. We need a plan, Martin said, glancing down at Daisy. The Labrador's tail wagged slightly as she looked between him and the transport. Got any ideas, girl? Daisy barked sharply, then trotted toward a stack of supply crates near the edge of the battlefield. Martin's eyes followed her path, landing on a cluster of fuel canisters stored haphazardly next to the crates. She's got the right idea, Martin said, a grin forming. If we can ignite those canisters, we'll take out their transport and most of their forces in one shot. Drena's eyes gleamed. A bold strategy, but how will we ensure the canisters are ignited at the right moment? Martin patted Daisy's head. We've got the perfect operative for the job. Drenak hesitated, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. You would send her into the heart of danger? Martin knelt to meet Daisy's eyes, his voice soft. Only if she's willing. What do you think, girl? Daisy wagged her tail once, her gaze steady and full of resolve. She understands, Martin said, standing. We just need to cover her until she gets close enough. Drenak's claws tightened around his blade. I will ensure no harm befalls her. The two warriors stepped into the fray, drawing fire from the mercenaries as Daisy slipped through the chaos. Martin's plasma shots were precise, forcing the enemy to take cover, while Drenak's brutal melee tactics scattered their ranks. Amid the confusion, Daisy reached the fuel canisters, her movements swift and deliberate. With a firm tug, she pulled a frayed cable free from a nearby generator. Sparks flew as the cable made contact with the canisters, igniting a small but growing flame. Daisy barked sharply and darted back toward Martin and Drenak, her tail wagging as she raced through the crossfire. She did it! Martin shouted, firing a shot to cover her retreat. Drenak roared, his blade cutting through the last mercenary in his path. Fall back! Now! The three of them sprinted toward cover as the flame reached the fuel canisters. The explosion that followed was deafening, a fiery blast that engulfed the transport and its surrounding forces. The shockwave knocked several mercenaries off their feet, and the remaining attackers broke ranks, retreating in disarray. As the dust settled, Martin knelt beside Daisy, checking her for injuries. She licked his face, her tail wagging furiously. You're incredible, Martin said, his voice thick with emotion. We couldn't have done it without you. Drenak approached, his golden eyes fixed on the Labrador. He knelt, lowering himself to her level, and extended a clawed hand. Daisy sniffed it briefly before licking his scaled fingers. You are more than I could have imagined, Drenak said, his tone reverent. You have the heart of a warrior. Martin grinned. Told you she wasn't just a pet. Drenak stood, his gaze meeting Martin's. You and your companion have my respect. Should you ever need an ally, the Xantha Legion will answer your call. I'll hold you to that, Martin said with a nod. As reinforcements from the summit's security forces arrived to secure the area, the three of them stood together, an unlikely alliance forged in the fires of battle. Daisy's tail wagged as she leaned against Martin's leg, her golden fur streaked with dirt, but her spirit unbroken. The summit's fate had been saved by courage, teamwork, and the unwavering determination of one remarkable dog.